Welcome to the Story Geeks Show. On today's show, we're reacting to the brand new Thor Love and Thunder teaser trailer. Then we'll be reacting to, breaking down, and discussing episodes 2 and 3 of Tokyo Vice, which is currently airing on HBOMax. We're going to go super deep into that show, so I hope you enjoy that. And finally, I will play an exclusive clip of our full cast audiobook, Death of a Bounty Hunter. This is the actual full cast audiobook clip that I'll be playing at the tail end of the show. We will be talking spoilers about both Tokyo Vice episodes 2 and 3. So if you haven't seen that yet, watch them in full and then come back and listen to the show. I do highly recommend the show, so if you're thinking about watching it, definitely give it a shot. I'm Jay Sherer, co-writer of Death of a Bounty Hunter and Timeslingers, and this is the Story Geeks Show. Joining me on today's show was the host of the Disney Culture Club, Dale Wentland. But before I get into Tokyo Vice with Dale, here's my reaction to the brand new Thor Love and Thunder teaser trailer. So let me tell you why I'm super excited about this particular trailer is because I have been a big fan of Taika Waititi, especially with what he's been doing in theaters. I think his movies have been really fun, and I'm really looking forward to Thor, Love, and Thunder. But let's just get into the trailer, shall we? Here we go, Thor, Love, and Thunder. By the way, I will be narrating some of this for audio listeners so you kind of know what's happening. And this trailer is going to start out with what looks like a young Thor running through a field with trees in the background. And sure enough, he turns into old school costume looking Thor, also running through. He looks like he's maybe in his teens or something like that. And he has the old school Thor costume, which is pretty fun. And then he turns into more modern looking Thor with a new, more modern looking costume as he runs through this field.
These hands were once used for battle. Now they're but humble tools for peace.
All right, so now he's talking about, he used to use tools for battle, but now he's using those humble tools for peace. So maybe he has had a change of mind about what he's supposed to do in his life. I should note that this is coming after the Thor that we saw in Endgame, which was a fairly broken Thor. Now, it is my favorite Thor. When I say he's a broken Thor, what I mean is he's lost some of his, he had this bravado about him. He had this arrogance about him, and he lost some of that. He was more of an anxious and depressed Thor, which I thought was actually really good for his character because it felt more real than the frat boy he was before, right?
To figure out exactly who I
am. Now, this is interesting because we have this song, Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses, is a super, what word do I want to use? James Gunn feeling song, right? And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the trailer. So we can see that he's been working out here again. He's still a heavier version of Thor here, but he's in the process of working out. He's using chains to do that. There's some kind of, it looks like a King Kong kind of monster that's just the skeleton of King Kong that was all chained up. So maybe he has to defeat that character early on in the show.
I want to choose my own path.
And then here we have Thor, who's slimmed down again. He's back to being buff Thor. And you can see teenage Groot in the background here. And it looks like he's with he's on some other planet that they're seemingly helping to rescue. And we also saw Quill a second ago. So Peter Quill, oh, he's here on the screen too. He's behind the rock. So he's with the Guardians of the Galaxy, which is where he was at the end of Endgame, right? He was part of that whole crew for a while there. So that's interesting. And now he's back in his Thor armor and he has Stormbreaker. Still on the same planet, but it looks like the Guardians of the Galaxy are actually leaving the planet and maybe leaving him behind, but it's hard to say because it's hard to tell when these two scenes were cut together. So that may be misleading us entirely.
My superheroing days are over.
And he says, my superheroing days are over. And then he's with Korg. Just seemingly, they want us to believe that he's watching the Guardians of the Galaxy leave, which may be true. He does not have his cool armor on anymore, though. He's just wearing the t-shirt he was wearing a couple seconds ago in this scene. And then Korg is there, and Korg has like a full-on new belt and new pants, so that's kind of interesting. But of course, Taika Waititi plays Korg, so there you go. Taika Waititi's in the movie alongside Thor. And now here's a shot where he looks like he's like a pirate of some kind. He's in this ship being pulled by some animals, and the animals are able to fly. So it's almost like he's, Santa Claus that's flying his sled, but it's a big ship. And then it looks like he's trying to be a pirate. And then it says, "Not every god." Now there he is again with his armor and his Stormbreaker, which makes me think that we're seeing lots of different times in this movie. Clearly he's talking about not being a superhero or not wanting to superheroing anymore. So that's, is that early on in the movie? Then he adjusts, or is that later on in the movie? I don't know. But that looks like it was like there's this big arena and someone catches a thunderbolt. And like, I don't know if this is supposed to be Zeus or like, so maybe this is a flashback to his younger days or something. Maybe he's in with a different group of gods potentially. It doesn't seem like this is Odin per se, but maybe it is Odin. I'm not sure. Not every god has a plan, I think is what it says. Giant shot of Korg and Thor in front of this ginormous creature on another planet. But it looks like that creature is no longer with us. It looks like it's dead. I don't know. And Peter Quill says, "Remember what I told you." And then there's a little shot of New Asgard, and there's a bunch of cruise ships in the background. And then there's a thing over here on the right side of the screen that says New Asgard Tours. And so what it seems like is happening is that New Asgard has become a tourist destination, which is a really interesting consequence of that being made known to humans.
You ever feel lost?
And then you hear Peter Quill saying, "If you ever feel lost,
Just look into the eyes.
just look into the eyes of the people that you love." And then we see another shot here where, again, it looks like I'm kind of wondering if this is the Roman gods or the Greek gods, because there's a Zeus-like character here, which maybe is Odin, but I doubt it. I'm not sure if I know which god would have lightning bolts like that. So we'll see.
People that you
And so, yeah, Peter Quill saying, just if you ever get lost, just look in the eyes of the people that you love. And and Peter Quill's looking at the Guardians of the Galaxy. And then Thor sticks his face in front of Peter Quill, which is hilarious and is categorically Taika Waititi. That is just the epitome of what he's up to.
not me.
And then Peter Quill says, "Not me." And that's really funny. I don't know if you guys have seen Our Flag Means Death, but I won't spoil it. But if you haven't seen Our Flag Means Death, it's a Taika Waititi show. He's involved in that show, and he's actually an actor in that show. And this has some of those same vibes right here in this scene.
What? Just listening.
And then we get the giant logo, which is a very 80s style logo, which goes really well with this soundtrack. And then this is really interesting. Mjolnir flies through the air, a hand grabs it, and then what do we see? Thor is like shocked. This looks like there's people battling behind Thor. I can't really see who that is or what they're doing, but this hand grabs it, and then we come down, and it looks like it is the Jane Foster Thor. Now I can't tell if that's Natalie Portman, because I do believe she's supposed to be playing the female version of Thor. I can't remember the character's name from the comics, but if you know it, let me know. But whoever's playing this, if it is Natalie Portman, then she bulked up. Oh my gosh, she's like super buff. If it's not Natalie Portman, then I don't really know who it is. I don't know who it's supposed to be, because I thought she was maybe coming back to play that role. But if you know otherwise, then leave me a comment. And this is coming in July of 2022. And interestingly enough, this film is not yet rated. I don't see this film getting anything but a PG-13 rating, though. So there you go. Thor: Love and Thunder coming to theaters in July. Can't wait for it. Taika Waititi always has some great humor and great moments with his characters. This looks no different. It is just a teaser, so it's kind of like a sizzle reel that doesn't really explain all that much. But what it does look like is that Thor is going on a journey to learn a little bit more about how to be a better superhero, because he says he's done superheroing, and maybe that's true. Maybe this whole movie is transitioning from one Thor to the next Thor, transitioning from the character that is played by Chris Hemsworth to the character that is played by Jane Foster. I don't know, but either way, I think it'll be really fun, and Taika Waititi brings a lot of heart to these things. So that's really, really cool. All right, now let's move on to Tokyo Vice and get into this. I'm going to welcome Dale Wentland to the show, and then we will jump right into episodes 2 and 3 of Tokyo Vice. And these are some deep questions. So I hope you enjoy this segment. Dale, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you. It's been a little while. I mean, we talk on Facebook Messenger, but it's been a little while since you and I podcasted together. We had some great conversations about Last Jedi, about Star Wars in general. So it's good to see you on the show again. How are you? How you doing?
I'm good. I've been safe up here in Canada, so
nice. That's perfect. And then we are going to get into you've kind of rebooted your show. We're going to talk about that after we dig into Tokyo Vice. So everybody stay tuned for that for sure. But let's just dive right into Tokyo Vice here. I have a little bit of a recap so people can remember what episodes 2 and 3 were sort of about, and then we'll jump into questions about 2 and 3. So with Tokyo Vice episodes 2 and 3, they showcase Jake getting his first story published at the newspaper, which puts him in hot water because his report turns out to be wrong. He had information that he couldn't trust from one of the detectives, which means that he needs to find a new police source. And that's when he starts to build a relationship with Detective Hiroto Katagiri. As that's unfolding, we learn a little bit more about the central conflict. It turns out that the police just want to keep the peace between different factions of the Yakuza. And 2 specific factions may actually go to war over a shared territory or a desired territory. And that potential turf war is over fees that are levied on small businesses. The small businesses actually pay these gangs to protect them, and yet there may be a turf war over this whole protection. So it's a very complex scenario that we find ourselves in. We're looking at journalism, we're looking at police activity, we're looking at gang activity, we're looking at the societal aspects of this escort service, and whether or not the escorts are prostitutes, we don't even quite know what the definition there is. So before I ask you the first question, you had told me that you were really into this show. Episode 1 particularly impacted you. You have a little bit of a background in studying some of the Japanese culture, if I'm not mistaken. Can you tell me a little bit about that before we jump into the actual questions?
Well, yeah, like I'm a bit of a casual theologian, and so I studied a lot of different types of religions, and but Japan is like a big passion for me, and so I learned some of the laws and the cultural nuances, and I have some Japanese friends, and just I've been kind of ingrained in the culture, not ingrained in observing the culture for a long period of time. I haven't had the privilege to go to Japan, but I also know what it's like to be a fish out of water, yeah, so I know some stuff about Japan. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I know enough to know that there's certain nuances, especially in episode 1, where Michael Mann, if you know him with LA, he tells you things about LA that you don't know, even you could live there your whole life. And he did the same thing with Tokyo, and I was blown away that he was able to do that, because he would have had to have really good advisors, or like just lived in Tokyo for a long time, and Michael manned it up. I had to take a moment. It was a lot. There were so many little nuances, just even to what Jake would order, like to not order white people food at the noodle place, right? To get chicken liver, and just the little looks that the Japanese people give, and those little subtleties, and the amount of respect he slowly builds with people over time, which is a huge thing in Japan, because it's so honor and respect motivated.
Yeah, which goes back, I'm assuming, centuries, if not millennia, right?
Always, yeah. Yeah. And it's truly ingrained, it's. I think for people watching it, when you're talking about the protection money, it's very Sopranos-esque if you needed that type of, that's this exact same thing. But I would say the motivator, other than money, is slightly different, and loyalty and respect and how you do loyalty and respect is different in Japan than it would be in America.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's great. This is going to be a fantastic conversation because you've got some good studying you've done there. So that's fantastic. I've done very little studying, so I'm mainly just responding to the show and asking myself questions that are coming out of the show. So this will be good. This will be really fun. There's a moment in episode 2 where Hiroto tells one of his fellow detectives that he thinks the Yakuza may be killing people who can't pay off their debts. And this comes right after a low-level Yakuza flunky, basically, has already confessed to the crime. So in episode 1, we saw a guy had been stabbed with like a full-on like sword. It was a sort of a knife, but it's like full-on like sword in the middle of the street. And they're suspecting, both Jake and Hiroto, they're suspecting that the Yakuza were involved in this murder and that they were doing so because this guy couldn't pay his debts. His family couldn't pay their debts. And so there's somebody that has basically said like, oh no, I did it. I killed the guy for some like bogus reason. And Hiroto here is just saying like, I don't think that this guy did it. I think there's something bigger going on here. And the response that he gets from the other detective is, look, man, we're just here to clear cases, which means that it doesn't matter if this guy did it or not. We're just trying to have a good police record. And if this guy says it, then we get to close this case. And then later on in episode 2 or 3, Hiroto tells Jake that the Yakuza's roots run deep, and he and the police in general basically are not trying to solve the Yakuza problem so much as trying to prevent that problem from becoming bigger and spilling over into the civilian population. And so this is where I get into the questions for you, Dale. Because these are some pretty big questions, and I'm glad you're a casual theologian, because I probably am probably a casual theologian as well. And these questions are kind of the things that we like to talk about. Why is justice so difficult to achieve? Why does it often feel like injustice is as prevalent or even more prevalent than justice is? And what does Tokyo Vice suggest about justice?
Well, oligarchy is why injustice occurs. So I would say there's a few things. One, we're looking at it through our lens, so our justice isn't the same, and especially in North America, you got that martial law type of justice. As you know, being a Western writer,
that's right.
And so that's prevalent, right? Like, as you know, stories and media kind of shape our expectations, and so that's the fact that those people didn't get shot in the club is the fact that someone was attacking someone with a knife and a police officer took out a billy club and scared them away as opposed to shooting them down on the street. Those are right. You're bringing in, so it's different. So justice, you have to see justice differently, and I think that is one of the big things that Tokyo Vice talks about, is that justice is different everywhere. And so one of the things you have to take a note too with this is that the honor system drives everything, and it's not that the Yakuza necessarily, like, to say their roots run deep is a bit of a misnomer in its sense. It would be more accurate to say like Japan is a tree and the Yakuza are the roots, and society is maybe like just like the beginning of the trunk, and like law and everything are the leaves, and they're everything else, because you need the Yakuza in a lot of aspects of Japan. And they needed them after World War II, and it's just really they're intrinsic. So it's hard to, you're not really taking down the Yakuza, so you have to maintain the peace. It is all about maintaining that that honor, and so Japan has super low crime rates, which is a sense of pride, national pride, and they want to keep those numbers in that sense of national pride. They want to look good to the world. They're very, at this time, 1999, very concerned about outward appearance, and those numbers, they want people to come. They want to rebuild, continue to improve on relations in North America, and so they have to take those all into considerations. It's these big things. And then also too, in Japan, defamation is different than it is in North America. So you in Japan, defamation is publicly questioning someone's honor, true or not. So to go to your superiors to say, well, this was actually some murders that are happening and you're ignoring them, you have to be so, that's not just like oh, he's an idea oriented person, or like you just questioned your superior's honor. And if you question the structure that you're a part of, you're questioning all your superiors. And again, you can be sued for defamation. There's a story about a guy who was just telling a story. He didn't mention any names, but he talked about someone in Japan. They call it quasi rape, but it's like a date rapist. And he just talked about the story and talked about this person who was doing these things, never mentioned any names, and he was successfully sued for defamation because someone was able to know enough information through the story to assume who it was, and that questioned their honor, and it was like equivalent to $70,000 American that they were awarded. Yeah. Wow. So it's a different thing, and so even in the first episode when they're like saying like it's not murder unless someone saw it, and it's more than just trying to brush stuff under the rug. It is, you don't question people's honor and until you see them not be honorable. And even then so that's the type of thing that they're trying to fight against. And this is systemic. This is completely societal, and everyone sees it exactly the same in Japan. As you can tell, uniformity is really important. So that's what I like, that's what I think Tokyo Vice is trying to say first, really, in these early episodes, is how different society is. And we're seeing it as injustice, and it is injustice, and we know it's injustice, but not everyone sees it as injustice. They see it as part of the system. And I would say that's kind of that big takeaway, is that, and that's where Jake kind of comes into play, because but we'll get into those other questions after. But that's the society doesn't see it.
I love that. I love that perspective, by the way. That's really, really good. I took a slightly different take on it, so I'll get into that a little bit, and then we'll discuss the differences, because I think it's really important that you noted what you noted. So one of the things I do is when I ask a question like this, it always makes me go like, well, what is justice even? Like, how do we even define justice, right? Like that is on its face difficult to do. And if you even look up the definition of justice, I looked it up this morning, there's like 6 different definitions of what justice could be. And so I think that, like, you could make an argument that is it getting what you deserve? Or, why is it a concept we even care about? Like, why do we mention justice as a thing that we care about? Do we even need the term? Why do we need the term? And I think that there is this, and I'm going to connect this back to Tokyo Vice, I promise. But I think that there's this issue that we have. You brought up like oligarchies, right? Which we'll talk a little bit more about too. But there's this sense that people aren't perfect, and then people aren't even good in some situations, right? So like we have people aren't perfect, people aren't good, people hurt each other and cause each other pain. And so in my mind, justice is trying to ensure 2 things: that wrongs are made right, and that nobody gets taken advantage of. Now, that's just a very, very basic definition of justice, right? And I think that, like, you could take it even further. You could start to talk about what's more just. Well, probably fairness and equality are more just. However, because the world does not appear to be fair or equal in many ways, that we could just list a whole host of ways that the world is not fair or equal, not only by the definition of the systems that we create that could make it more fair or equal, or less fair or equal, but also just that people are born different. People are born with inequalities and not with unfairness, right?
Just even location.
Exactly, just even location. So so justice sort of means, I think that if we get into that fairness and equality definition, we've moved into the realm of philosophy or spirituality, or, to you and I's thought process, theology, right? Like that's something that's like, well, that's something you'd have to talk about at a theological, philosophical, spiritual level. You can't talk about that in in a very pragmatic way. So to me, justice is sort of like saying, we want wrongs to be made right, and so that people don't get taken advantage of. Which then brings me to Tokyo Vice, and it says like, well, how do you apply that thinking to Tokyo Vice? And I think you did an excellent job of explaining the different perceptions that people have of what justice even could be. So like when I asked that question, well, the Yakuza are trying to help people not get taken advantage of, right? Like, and they're trying to sometimes make right what wrongs are. Like, so we would have to admit that not paying back your debts could be perceived as a wrong. Now, you and I would say like, well, we can't just kill people who don't pay their debts back. But like, you could argue that like, okay, well, that's in an honor culture. That would be very, very important, is to pay back the thing that you owed. So I think that you have, and this is what I would love to hear your response to. I'm going to go through each character and just give a perception of what kind of justice they're fighting for. And then I want to hear your perspective of that, because some of these characters are Japanese characters, some of these characters are American characters.
Yeah.
So I think Jake sees the Yakuza as evil purveyors of injustice, and therefore they need to be exposed because at least some of them are preying on people. Now, I think that that's going to get delineated out a little bit more. If some people may not be as bad as other people in the Yakuza framework, but again, we're only on episode 2 and 3. Then there's the police. The police let the underworld live by their own rules so long as it doesn't spill over into the working class. So justice means that in the police definition, you sort of get what you signed up for, right? Like if you signed up to be a Yakuza and there's Yakuza violence, you signed up for it. It is what it is. But if you didn't sign up for it, then we want to kind of protect you from what could be going on with them.
Yep.
Hiroto is seeing some spillover into the citizen class and is already willing to help Jake expose the truth because he's worried that it will kind of roll out of control, right? Because he does see some of the Yakuza's injustices against the common citizens. Sato, which I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but he's the young Yakuza who actually is one of the most fascinating characters in the show from my perspective.
Yeah.
He was on the path to being a fishmonger, which you could consider part of their caste system, right? Like it's probably difficult to make it out of being a fishmonger, right?
You don't even, if you notice in their culture, you're always tagged as who you were, even if you're changing your stars.
Exactly. That's why he gets in a fight with the guy, right? Like, so because he's calling him a fishmonger. So, or actually, he's making fun of his sexuality too. But like, that's all wrapped up in the same kind of argument.
The fact that he was allowed to do that's a boss. He's not the boss. He's a boss.
Yeah.
And everyone just sat around and wanted to see how he would respond.
Exactly. Let's see what happens in the honor culture when this kind of thing goes down. And I do think that the Sato's version of injustice is basically, I don't think I should have to be relegated to being a lower class citizen. And so I'm going to better myself by being a Yakuza, because otherwise it's unjust that I would be forced to be this fishmonger. And then finally, Samantha, who seems to lean towards Sato's view, right? Like she's obviously an expat that's living in Japan, but she's much more pragmatic the way Sato is pragmatic, meaning I'm going to do what it takes to make a better life for myself. And now she does have a sense of justice in terms of like, you shouldn't hurt her fellow escorts, but it's a much more pragmatic sense of justice as opposed to what you might call Jake's sense of justice, which is kind of like, well, we need to expose the truth. These people are like, well, it's not enough to expose the truth. We've got to live life too. So give me a take on those characters and how their views of justice are shaping them.
Yeah, I would. So it's totally accurate to say like Jake is more like hero justice, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But like it makes sense.
Yeah, right.
But even just the environment that he grew up in. He grew up in the American police environment, and got to see all that type of heroic, those heroic acts. So that's kind of his thought process. And again, too, gang member equal bad. But again, at no point am I, saying become a Yakuza and
right.
But you're right with your vision. It's a pathway to progress. And again, too, I'm going back to Sopranos just for people's brains, because it's sometimes held. But again, that was the same. Say for Christopher or whatever. Or even Tony. No one was going to give us anything. No one was helping the Italians, and it's that same thing. No one is helping the lower caste in a place where there's no real immigration. lo and behold, people find a way to be racist, and it usually based off of jobs and location of where you live.
Right.
And then also probably, in Japan too, the darkness of your skin and the shape of your face, and because the different shape of your face would imply that your family comes from different locations, and especially if you had a more Chinese face or a Korean face. So those things are really important, and people hide those things. I think the one thing too, when people hear the word gaijin, they think that it means like white
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
person.
What does it mean? I don't know.
It just means foreigner.
Okay, okay.
And so it's foreigners they have a problem with.
Got it.
So there are other gaijin around, which we see, right?
Yeah.
And they all have the same problems as Jake. But Jake doesn't even see the other gaijin in his life.
Right.
He doesn't
right.
even, because there's one gaijin in Jake's life.
Yeah.
But so for Jake, he has that hero kind of justice, and it's not wrong,
Right.
and I think that's important. It might be a little condescending,
Right.
but his vision isn't necessarily incorrect. And then for justice for, who else was it? Did you have just for Hiroto?
Hiroto, the police, Samantha, Sato,
So
like any of those characters.
So that's to maintain the peace, right?
Yeah.
To maintain status quo, to make sure it doesn't, the innocents aren't taken advantage of. A lot of the crime gets hidden with suicide. So because suicide is a normal thing it's sad and tragic, but it's a more normalized thing in the culture. And so a lot of murders or a lot of gang violence, it can be hidden through suicide. And so that is concerning, because the suicide rates are a thing of national disgrace, right? They're not proud of that information as they are proud of the police numbers. So that's something that police need to be worried about as well. And again, it's hiding the truth of things. And I think we learned in one of the episodes at this point about why people would light themselves on fire in the street.
Right. Yep. They talked about that in the episode. Yeah.
Wild. Right. But again, it's its own type of justice and honor to go kill yourself out in the street, so no one has to deal with it.
Right. Exactly.
Except for the paid cleanup crew.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not damaging anyone's property, because people will talk about that sometimes, suicide in North America, like how selfish it is. And they usually mean like, because, you're dead in a bathroom or something like that, or in your bedroom. And it's, now you're impacting other people. Japanese people are so considerate. They'll go do it in a forest, or if they're going to kill themselves and light themselves on fire. No damage will happen to anybody. It's going to be some shocking to some people, but there's like a cleanup crew that comes by and takes care of it. I know it seems like so dark to be so casual.
Yeah,
but it's just part of the honor system. It is part of the culture. So that's again, I think a lot of the reason the police are maintaining. Right. It isn't arrest the guy trying to commit assault. It's like, tell him to go home.
Right.
The gang war, it's not, even when they start giving up the soldiers, to take 3 soldiers for like a nothing thing was the police warning everybody. It was to put the one Yakuza group, the Toza, in their place, because they're bumping up, they're trying to cause a little trouble, they want a little more power, so give us 3. And then the next scene that we see after that is the other Yakuza gang laughing about how many people they had to give up. And it's, so now they feel like, okay, we're good, the police are like agreeing with us a little, we can calm down a little. And that's where the justice gets strange, right? You're like, well, they're just, some people are just giving themselves up. Like, no one really, because in America you want retribution usually. You wouldn't call it vengeance, but you'd want retribution. And there's no retribution really. It's more of just an exchange of pleasantries, and that's bizarre in our minds.
Right.
And then Sam, her again, she doesn't. I don't think she cares about anybody or anything unless
Mm,
it's for her protection and safety, which she should, because I don't think anyone cares about her either. So
right. Right.
she's very much like fight for yourself and look after yourself.
Yeah.
She's not trying to say anything about anybody. She doesn't care what their job is. She she doesn't want to really join Jake's crusade, because you would think, right, like they almost were like, oh, Jake's gonna loop her in and she kind of gives him some information or whatever, but that's it.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
doesn't even, it's kind of weird, she doesn't even, you think she would have the white savior complex, but no.
Not at all. Yeah, not at all. She's almost trying to escape the
Yeah,
whole white aspect of life in some ways, but then in some ways she stands up for herself in ways that you probably wouldn't see someone of a Japanese culture do. So it's interesting.
right, yeah.
She's a very fascinating character, actually.
She's got like a
Um,
Superman problem. She's as
yeah,
white as she needs to be.
right, exactly. All right, that's great. And I wanted to just bring out a couple more things before we move on to the next question, and that is that I think that one of the reasons I really like Noir is that it exposes that the very definition of justice is not as black and white as we would
Mm.
hope.
Yeah,
It is not as there are so many different aspects that are pragmatic and not moral, that it shows that it's elastic. It's like it changes depending on the scenario and depending on the situation. Um and I
yeah,
think that the question of why is justice so difficult, I think that there's Tokyo Vice says there's three ways that it's so difficult to answer that question. One, the world isn't fair or equal, which it showcases in Sato's character for sure, and Samantha's character for sure. People aren't perfect and are two. This is two. People aren't perfect and are oftentimes willfully bad. And then three, because of those two things, the concept of justice itself is far grayer than it is black and white with all the different perspectives. So just to give some real world examples, because I think that's always kind of interesting to look at. Okay, this is a work of fiction that's based on a real world example, but then there's other like BLM protesters calling to abolish the police while other people are literally picking up the phone to call the police to protect them from the rioters who are not a part of the BLM protesters, but just happen to be there to cause problems and conflict. That now you have this very complex, not very black and white view of justice anymore. It's like, well, there's a lot of complexity here. We buy Apple products despite knowing that labor practices in other countries may be predatory or worse. And then you brought up a really good point that made me think of, because growing up in LA, there's always this thought process of like the Bloods and the Crips and the difference between the Bloods and the Crips and why they butt up against one another. Well, one of the reasons this is to your point about the Yakuza, one of the reasons the Bloods popped up as a gang is because when the Crips started taking over neighborhoods, they started to bully certain parts of those neighborhoods. And then the Bloods said, well, we got to rise up just to fight the Crips because we can't call the police. Right. So
right.
there's these complex systems of justice. I was even watching a YouTube video. There's a YouTuber called Kurt Kaz, and he travels around the world. He's from South Africa, and he goes into the craziest places. And he just posted a video the other day where he's in Brazil in one of the favelas, which are like the sprawling ghettos they have there, and there's literally gunfights between the gang members and the police. But one of the guys was telling him, like, these gang members actually protect some of us from the police, right? So this concept that justice is like this easy black and white thing where the sheriff shows up in a white hat and he and he says, oh, you're bad, and then like, to your point, retribution happens. That's just not a thing for most people, right? That's just not a thing people can just mostly deal with. So I love that Noir exposes us to these other concepts of justice, and I have not seen it done. I know that it has been done in the Japanese spaces before, but I really like how this is being done. So fantastic stuff we're getting from Tokyo Vice.
Yeah, right. Like, it's always important, like, all things being perfect, then yeah, justice could be easy, right? But
Yes.
some of those that run forces are those that burn crosses.
Right. Exactly.
And
Exactly.
and right there, right at that one concept,
Yep.
then justice is no longer, you can't be doled out by that group. And
Exactly.
they're actually not in charge of justice even.
Yeah. Right.
And I do think it's important, anytime you bring up defund the police, I think it's important that you should not, there is a difference between not wanting police to have tanks and abolishing the police. And like, so for me, like when I see it from my perspective in Canada, you know, a lot of people will say, like, think that defund the police, they get it wrong. Like they get that idea as well. Like again, abolishing, like get rid of the police and like less cops and stuff. It's just like, they don't need tanks, and they shouldn't be going to so many different types of situations. Like, is it justice for a cop to go to someone, like to a call where someone is mentally ill, or you know, would it be justice to have shot down those Yakuza members and then have had hundreds of people be killed in the wars that would follow afterwards? Would that have been justice?
Right.
And that's, you know, I think that's important to remember. With just that made me think of that when you were talking about it.
I mean, these are all things that are, again, they're gray, right? Is there a situation? Is there a situation in the world where you would want the police to have a tank? Probably. I mean, probably. There's probably some place where the forces that are doing bad are so heavily armed that you might need the police to be as heavily armed, and maybe the citizenry. But then you and I would say, well, yeah, but isn't it a better world if we can just have nobody armed? Like, isn't that a better place to live where that isn't as big of a concern? I mean, these are things that, like, they're very, this is again where I think the show is telling us there are some principles that we should abide by. Justice is important, but what does justice even mean? And if you viewed it from someone else's shoes, would you see it differently? And I think the answer to that is yes. Like yes, it's important. Yes, it's important to see it from different people's shoes. And no, it's not easy to come up with solutions that would just instantly solve some of the problems that every single culture in the world would deal with relative to these things. So it just gets very complex very fast, obviously.
Yes. Yeah. That's all. And and we just, the problem too, I think, in our society, our one is we don't review ourselves enough, and we don't listen to you know, like, even being in the Disney community, like, people don't even listen to, like, they'll be like, I'm the greatest Walt Disney fan of all time, and then listen to nothing that he said ever.
Right,
you know,
right.
And people do that even with the founding fathers of America, right? You know, like Thomas Jefferson, I'm pretty sure it was Thomas Jefferson, said that you should probably, like, redo the government all the time, right? I think it was
right.
You know, not as so eloquent as I put it, but and we don't do that self review, and, you know, and so when things just keep getting budgets, and it's important to review, and you know, for me, I think police should be paid more. They should be more trained. They should actually be a profession and not like a backup career. It should have as much schooling as a lawyer. They should it should be, like, again, highly paid, highly protected, you know, harsh laws if anything comes against them, but at the same time, lots of responsibility, lots of accountability, and a different mandate.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, and that is totally another thing that we could dive into and even compare to Tokyo Vice. But just for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to the next question too. Great discussion on question number 1. And this question revolves a lot more around the cultural stuff again. And Mike Gordon and I talked a lot about culture shock and cultural integration when we discussed episode 1. We both talked about being a fish out of water in different cultures too, not Japanese cultures, but other cultures. This show continues to explore that concept. And there's another big topic here that I think is one that's worth discussing. Cultural integration versus cultural change. And, you know, one of the things that we'll hear talked about a lot in the modern world is colonization. And so there's this question I have in my mind of, like, Jake traveled all the way from Missouri. He's the first foreigner to work at this particular Japanese newspaper. And it feels like while he's trying to learn the ropes, he also may be trying to influence how Japanese people think and feel. So this is my question for you, Dale, and we'll discuss it in general. Is that a form of colonization, or is this a guy who's trying to do the right thing, or is it a little bit of both? Or what do you think Tokyo Vice is suggesting as Jake travels across the globe to influence this other culture?
Yeah, we touched a little bit about it, but, you know, where it is, there is that in our culture in North America, and for you, with Christianity,
Mm.
every time you talk about Christianity doesn't mean you're trying to convert somebody.
Right, exactly. I'm glad you said that, because that's very true. It's very
Right?
true.
Even though
Yeah.
like that's like a mission statement and all that jazz, you're not always trying to do it. And
Right.
so I really relate to him, because I'm someone like, you plunk me down in like a meeting room, doesn't matter what it is. I
Mhm.
could sit there, listen to the conversation for a while, and have some suggestions and some ideas on how you can make some improvements or changes and things like that. And that's how my brain works. And so I really related to him in that regard, because he's our Luke Skywalker in the first episode, taking us through everything.
Yeah.
And I said to you, like, this is a great time. This is a great time for this type of content, because white guys, I think, really need to this type of content,
Mm.
where they're a fish out of water. They don't know everything, and some of their good qualities are their follies in other situations.
Mm.
And I think, hopefully, because for some reason apparently it's hard to connect to May and like Turning Red and stuff like that, because it's like, oh, I couldn't have possibly adapt that story for my own life situation. So okay, fine, here's a white dude then, and and maybe you can adapt this. And I hope, like, for me, empathy is something that's trained over time.
Mm.
And I think as a North American audience, we need a little more empathy.
Mm.
And I think that this is such a great pathway to that. And so there
Mm.
is that bit of colonization, but it's kind of who we are. It's just why our culture is the way it is.
Mm.
We're all like, I don't think that it's as it's as on purpose as it may seem.
Mm.
And I think he kind of starts to more realize the condescension behind what he's doing, and he gets kind of slapped with it a couple times,
Yep.
especially, and because again, by episode 3, by episode 3, we know that his boss she's Korean, right?
We might not know that quite
I
yet,
think at the
but
very end,
okay.
end of the episode, well, at the very end of the episode, she's speaking Korean to somebody, and she goes
Oh,
into a
yeah,
house
yeah.
at the very end, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
yeah. So you are supposed to kind of,
Yes.
So, and she's given them the letter of the law, right? And so
Yes.
she is a foreigner as well.
Yeah.
And that is a bit of on us to not,
Yes.
like, we didn't see that. And that was some film, that was trickery for us.
Right, exactly.
And so there is this, it is intrinsic just to the North American sentiment. So I do agree there's some colonization, but it's not so bad.
Mm.
But it's a good vision. He's not wrong. I actually think Japan in this situation needs a foreign perspective.
Mm.
And I think through all the time, we all need foreign perspectives, and they're people that are slightly removed from our culture, but like have taken the time to learn it, appreciate it. And then they're like, hey, there's this huge gap.
Yes.
And we should listen to those people, like the educated foreigners, right? Like that, they're the ones who they see it,
Yes.
Ronnie Chang, stand-up comedy comedian, he just has a new Netflix special, and it's all about his perspective in America, because he's been to 3 other countries, like, because he can see, like, he loves America, and he can see that there's what these issues are, and that's kind of my whole thing, right? It's like I love so much about America. I love American people, and I'm Canadian, and it's just slightly different, and so I just see things slightly, and I can help you with some, and our suggestions can help you with some of your problems
Exactly.
that no one else is having.
Right.
And so I think, and again, it goes the other way. So a good thing to look at is like tech companies.
Mm.
They really took a lot of Japanese business models on loyalty and company loyalty, and applied them in Silicon Valley. And that's why you get, like, they're called like tech cults and stuff like that, because that's how we would perceive being loyal to a company like that. It can only be cultism. And Where in Japan, again, that loyalty is ingrained so early on, and like that's like the first. Could you be loyal to, like in his interview? Could you even be loyal to us? Like, or do white people have loyalty? Like, and,
right.
and so our society has improved and grown through the visions and the practices of another country in Japan. And again, those practices were taken right into the tech industry. So it does go both ways, and it's important to do, especially in a globalized world.
Yep.
But for me, I think the America has exported the American dream for so long. It needs to import other visions to grow and improve. And I think that you're seeing that, where he's trying to export the American dream.
Yeah. That's very true. I think so. You said a lot of the same things that I was going to say, because I think that no, that's perfect. That's perfect. I think that it would be ludicrous for us to think, show me evidence of a perfect system that's been created by humanity at any point in time in the history of humanity, and I would be shocked. I've never seen a perfect system created. I'm very much a systems type of thinker. I like to think in terms of systems. Even when I'm doing my storytelling and my writing, I'm thinking of it in terms of a system. Now I can sometimes, to your point earlier, I can use some pushes to think more empathetically to individuals, right? And I think that both of those truths, that no perfect system has ever been created and that we need more empathy for other people, lead me to the same conclusion that you came to, which is to say that rather than assume, first of all, the one mistake you can make is, my culture is superior and better, therefore I must take over another culture. That is colonization. That should not happen. The other conclusion you can make is that my culture is inferior to the other culture, and therefore I must completely adapt to whatever it is that they say is correct, because that would assume that one of these two systems is perfect. And I think that one thing that's obvious to me is that the more, basically exactly what you said, the more we can learn from each other, the more we can understand how to create better systems that actually include empathy to get us along the right path, right? So it's about this. It's not about saying, it is about saying no colonization. It is about saying no full integration. It is about saying, let's learn to create something better, and knowing that other people's perspectives will be superior to our own, in my opinion.
That is what Canada tries to create. I would say, out of the third difference between Canada and America is, in Canada, or in America, it's a melting pot, right? You go to America to become American. In Canada, we call it a cultural mosaic. And that's how we describe it in school. It's how we're taught about what our system is. And it is about bringing all those different perspectives and cultures, and then celebrating those differences. And those differences make us a whole picture of Canada. And so someone who's Sikh and they're wearing their turban, that is Canada. Someone going to a Taoist temple is Canada. Someone going to mass on Sunday is Canada. And that's kind of how we see that stuff. Now, not everybody does, right? we all have our
you all have your
and that's the thing that we learn about too, right? Like, again, racism is everywhere, nationalism is everywhere, and it's just as strong in Japan as it is in America or Canada or Britain or wherever we want to.
Well, that sense of tribalism that we need to protect our own is so strong in the human nature, right? Like, and I think that one of the things that you said that's really fascinating to me is that we're seeing, I'll just speak about my country. In the US, we're seeing something that I think is really fascinating, and I've been thinking about this for a couple decades now, is that a company that is focused on freedom is having this culture war over who's free to do what. and that has been happening for like a long period of time in the US. It's as a country that was like literally found on the principles of saying, now found with a giant hole in the system that didn't include people of people of African American descent largely, but this concept that like freedom was the way that we should be. So if you go back and actually interpret, if you take the Bill of Rights and if you take our Constitution, there's so many ways that we've failed to actually implement those two basic thoughts. Like those two basic thoughts about like you should be free to do whatever you want, and then but you can't infringe upon the rights of somebody else. Well, that should be the leading focus. Like think of how many problems could be solved today if we just said, okay, you're free to do what you want and you're free to do what you want. And how about we don't shout at each other or come to blows over the fact that you two can each do what you want to do? Is because you're not infringing upon each other's rights. And it's not until you do fringe upon each other's rights that you like start to get crazy. So it's a very fascinating perspective. And I think I'm kind of hoping that one of the things that happens in the US is that people learn to come together. And I think this has happened on and off throughout our history, but that people come together around a promotion of freedom, saying, I don't really have the same ideological perspective you do, but I will fight for you to have your right to have it and to pursue it, right? But it's not something that we're doing really great right now.
Because it's tough. It's tough.
It's very tough.
Another person's freedom is another person's injustice.
Yes.
And that's the problem when you have capitalism, where you have a system based on winners and losers, and you have to leave some people behind, and you have to take money from somewhere, and so it's tough. Like in Canada, we had the Freedom Rally truck things.
Oh yeah,
and they've ruined the Canada flag. Like I can't even see the Canadian flag anymore. Like before, when you'd see Canadian flags, it'd be like, oh, we must have won gold medal in hockey or something. And now you see it and you're like, oh, that person's a jerk. And because again, like the thing, like there was no freedoms. It was just like trying to be protected. And, people create false dichotomies all the time. That's probably like one of the most common, like other than straw man, logical fallacy. False dichotomy is such a logical fallacy that people fall into. And some people just can live in a world where restrictions could be placed upon them, and then they could trust that someone would lift them later. Right? Because that's, restrictions are fascism and dictatorship. Oh yeah, totally. When you're in a totalitarian government, but you're in a democracy, so it doesn't work that way. And it was never in question. It was never in jeopardy. And you're inciting fear and hate, and your agenda is obviously always different. Like the agenda, how quickly the agenda gets to critical race theory is mind blowing. And it's just a different agenda. And that's the problem. That's so for me, freedom of speech. Yes. Hate speech though. I don't know. And then who defines what hate is, right? And so now I'm stopping someone's freedoms, and because I also feel like the people should have the freedom to not be persecuted.
Well, so this is what's always a fascinating conversation, because it's very difficult. And part of the reason why is because,
why aren't we solving it, Jay?
Oh, I wish we could. And here's actually my deep-seated belief about it, which is because Josh, who was on my first show, the Story Geeks Coming Back, Josh was the first guest I had, and he was your co-host at Network 1901. Yeah. You and Josh come from a much more left-leaning perspective than I do. I'm not as left-leaning as either of you, right?
No.
And one of the reasons for that is because whenever I study a system, I always think to myself, well, that's not perfect, and it's got lots of problems with it, right? Like, so I'll see a thing like, so at the beginning of the show, you brought up like the oligarchy, and the oligarchy, oftentimes, whether it's the oligarchy comes about through communism or socialism or however the oligarchy comes about, that in itself can create corruption and problems. And so there's this idea that I think that I do think we should try to create better systems. As a systems thinker, I'm in favor of that. And that's why we have conversations where I don't have to agree with everything Dale says to be Dale's buddy, right? Like I don't have to, because we can just have a great conversation. Same thing with Josh. But I also will think to myself things like, well, yes, capitalism has these aspects of crony capitalism and greed, and it does have winners and losers to it. But also, if I look at socialism or communism, if I look at the historical record of how some of those perform, that's also can get really bad. So it's this idea that we need to take our systems and look at where they're weakest, and
Right.
then say, how do we make up for these weaknesses? Because these weaknesses have some severities to them that can cause massive problems within the people. And I do think too, even though I'm tend to be a systems thinker, I will say that I also believe that it is on us to have these kinds of conversations, to come out of this watching the material that we watch and thinking about the material that we think about, to be able to go forth and say, well, how do I behave today? Because I might be in a capitalist system and might not be able to change it, or I might be in a communist system and might not be able to change it. But how should I behave today? Right?
Oh,
Like, and that's
yeah.
a very different question. You know?
Yeah. Well, and so there's a few things. Yes, left is an easy way to explain me. But one, I see the political spectrum as a circle and not a left and right. It's more properly defined as a circle. So I see it more like totalitarian government, democracy, and in between those, I can recognize the left and right.
Yeah.
But for me, when in doubt, I've early on when I was kind of trying to formulate, I have no ologies, I have no isms, I push them all away.
Nice.
And so when I look at something, when in doubt, I lean towards people, and thus I get this kind of left sensation, which that shouldn't be the case.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Like that's not what right wing is supposed to be.
Right.
But it is important to look at it like that, because someone actually on Twitter, I actually told someone something on Twitter and they heard me and then changed their opinion, and I was blown away. And
It's the first time it's ever happened.
Yeah,
it might be the last time.
Yeah. And they're like, how come communism seems so similar to fascism, but they're on the completely opposite ends? And I was like, well, just take those 2 points and bring them together. And it's because it's just a tool for totalitarianism, right? I think capitalism works great. I think that you can that capitalism just needs to be directed. And I think that the losers in capitalism, not that you're a loser, but that bottom doesn't need to be so bottom. It could be brought up, and then we have to deal with the exponential growth problem, but space will solve a lot of that. So, I'm like, Run the Jewels. Like Killer Mike. I would say I'm a mix between like Killer Mike and Larry David. It would probably be
nice. I like both of those things, which is probably why I like you. Yeah, that's great. That's great. So, just in the interest of time, I'm going to let you pick the last question.
Sorry.
No,
I
you're
was
good.
like, there's no way we're going to get through 4 questions.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because I love the deeper conversation. So, would you rather talk about the responsibilities of journalists and news outlets, or would you rather talk about, or I can punt that for another another show, and we can talk about the let's see, what do I got here? Oh, this concept of knowledge, and the concept of knowledge being something that we should pursue. Would you rather talk about knowledge, or would you rather talk about journalism and the news media?
I think it's kind of both. I think it blends. So I think we could kind of think it, but I think question 4 is a good one, and then we can probably, it all kind of comes together.
Perfect. So I'm going to jump into question number 4, and then we'll go after it, because we're having this. I think the more you can have deep discussions like this, the more pleased I am. So thank you for joining me on this. This is great.
Yeah.
There's a moment in this show in Tokyo Vice where one of Jake's crime journalist buddies is questioning why he even works for the newspaper. Now, this is one of his buddies who actually is one of the better writers, by the way, at the newspaper amongst the younger crew here. And he's just questioning like why he even works there. And Jake tries to encourage him by saying that his dad, Jake's dad, used to get 2 newspapers every day. And when Jake asked his dad why he did that, his dad said, every day the knowledge of the world increases a little bit, and this newspaper is evidence of that. And it seems incredibly motivating to Jake. It's part of the reason why he's doing this thing as a foreigner working for one of the better Japanese newspapers that exists. But what do you think about that statement? in 2022? Does it resonate with you, or why not? I'll repeat it one more time and I'll let you take over. Every day, the knowledge of the world increases a little bit, and this newspaper is evidence of that. What do you think about that?
It resonates for me, at least, on like every level.
Oh,
Right?
nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I'm a humanist first and foremost. Like I'm worried about 5,000 years from now. I know that like for a lot of people, they like don't understand that.
Yeah.
For me, I'm very much about what we do now will only like really matters more as long as people exist.
Right.
And so if people need to keep existing.
right.
So
Anti-Thanos. We're anti-Thanos.
yeah. So,
yeah.
and again, it works in a lot of ways, but you just have to go to space. And not people, just like our resources need to go to space. We need to be, that's part of Elon Musk's big whole plan, which is, it's funny, like, because people hate him or they think he's like, you're not supposed to go to everybody for your like for every opinion,
Right.
Like, if you got like some
Right.
manufacturing questions or how to send a rocket to space, ask Elon.
Right.
If you want to know how to like take care of the disabled, don't ask Elon Musk.
right.
But so it hit me really, like, again, like, so like I'm a dreamer. I believe people should be getting better every day. I always believe there's a path to redemption. It like motivates me in my life. It's the reason, like, I believe it. Like, I want to have a podcast because I want to be a part of that betterness or that history. Like, we don't need to put ourselves out here. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's not like you're not making like $150,000 a year.
No,
to put, like, to expose yourself.
Right. Exactly.
To put your beliefs on trial.
Right.
I did a video. Oh, back in the day, it was say like white men are ruining Star Wars, because there was a hashtag women.
I remember that. I remember that.
So this group called like the Toxic Brood or whatever, like decided to like watch my video and make fun of me for like 4 hours or some crazy thing they did. And I hopped on to their thing and talked to them about it. And in retrospect, I wish I was a little more prepared, because I could have just like destroyed them all with their logical fallacies. But that, like, I wanted to be a voice to point out how ridiculous it would be to suggest that women could ruin Star Wars, or that men, like, to say that women are ruining Star Wars, mostly men are ruining Star Wars. How ridiculous! Like, we're like, it's just so silly. And that was like completely lost on them. But I would do it again. Because even just the one episode of the podcast, really, someone messaged me being like, "I'm glad to hear that you're back. I love your opinions, and like, you are like always just hoping everyone will be okay." And like that's why you do it. That's why we do these podcasts, why we spend time dissecting story, because we want to be a part of history. We are increasing our knowledge every day. In 1500 Germany, they couldn't read, and they were like, well, let's if you commit a crime, we're gonna just figure out how much we should punish you before we kill you. Like, that was it. That was society.
Right.
We were like, oh, I burnt my bread. Okay, well, that's only 3 days of torture before you're murdered. What? Like, okay, like, that just seems harsh.
Right.
Learn to read. So like, and like, that's not that long ago. Right. Like, and like, that's like real stuff. And so we're always getting better every day, and we are getting smarter every day. And and people should be feeling safer every day. And so it hits super hard for me with that, it almost makes me want to like leave my family and learn Japanese and go and become a journalist.
Become Jake.
Yeah. So I think what's important about that too now is that times like, why you asked that question, I think, is because in 2022 we no longer do what we used to do. So with the news, we used to get given neutral information, and then we would develop opinions based on our knowledge and experience, and then debate what actions we needed to take with the facts that were presented to us.
Right.
Nowadays, we debate the facts. And it's because you've got, obviously you've got 24-hour news stations that are creating false narratives. They mix commentary and opinion with news reporting, so they can point to the news report to say that they were factually accurate, but then their commentary is false. Or you have someone like Tucker Carlson who will do a very kindergarten thing and just propose everything as a question.
Right.
So I'm not saying anything. I'm not inciting anything. I'm just asking the question: should we allow Black people to own homes? That's all I'm asking. I'm just asking the question. And and so again, that makes people debate the facts, right? And once you're debating facts and you're not trusting where facts come from, you can't make that's the beginning. The system then doesn't work anymore. If those who run forces burn crosses and those who are supposed to give us facts tell us lies, democracy is built off news and feeling safe. And so if you can't agree on facts, and that, I think, then especially we'll use America, it will always be divided. Because you're no longer using logic, because the facts are different, so you can't get to a logical conclusion. It just becomes I feel that this would be the right way to do it. It feels right for me,
right?
And that makes sense when we're talking someone's own gender journey or something, but not when we're talking about science.
Right. Well, okay. So one of some of the things that you said that because it's interesting because I don't resonate with the statement. However, one of the ways that you interpreted the statement, I do resonate with. So I want to externalize some of that because one of the things I think that is true. So I call this statement a partial truth, that knowledge is what we're striving for. I think is a partial truth, because one of the things that you just said is one of the things that I really resonate with. And that is in terms of us putting ourselves out there, in terms of us trying to speak into issues, right? I don't think that we're just talking about knowledge anymore. We're talking about wisdom. We are trying to say, let's take the knowledge that exists and let's try and seek wisdom amidst that knowledge. And wisdom just being an application of knowledge that betters us in some way, betters the community in some way, shape, or form. That is, what's the best way of using this knowledge to then behave? And I think that the problem why it doesn't resonate with me in 2022 is that I think that people. So just for one thing, just let me reiterate what you said, because Tucker Carlson's a great example. I even listened to a. Just to give a balanced perspective, I also listened to a Rachel Maddow segment where I was like, you literally just said, just came to a bunch of false conclusions. And I know that because I looked at the other information, right? Now, so I'm appreciative that information can be as widespread as it is. However, I do think that there are two consequences of knowledge that are actually detrimental to us as human beings. The first is that a plethora of knowledge given to us in a fire hose way does not allow us to differentiate between the feelings that we get from that knowledge and our ability to interpret it and internalize it and then be wise about it. So let me give you a couple of examples. It used to be when the show was taking place in the late 90s, you didn't have the type of information deluge that we had today. The internet was still in its infancy. I mean, this is back when I was in college. We were not even allowed to use the internet to cite sources. Because it was I
remember that. Yeah, well, it's too easy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's either too easy or there's no way we can verify whether or not that's true or false, so you can't use it.
And Wikipedia wasn't allowed.
Wikipedia was not cool at all. And yet now there's these scenarios where it used to be that I might hear about, let's just say that there was a mass shooting in Texas, a horrible event. It happens in Dallas. And then I hear about it either the next day or maybe 2-3 days later. I don't hear about it like right when it's happening.
Right.
Now, because of social media and because of our attention, I hear about it as it's happening, and it causes massive anxiety.
Yeah.
Massive anxiety for something that I can literally do nothing about at the time it's happening, when it's spilling over. And so I feel like there's this thing that happens where information overload, knowledge overload causes us to kind of like retreat from it, retreat from knowledge. And then that, by definition, sometimes will cause us to retreat from wisdom, because we retreat from what we could actually do about a problem. We retreat from saying, hey, so that doesn't happen in our city, what should we be looking out for? What should we be taking care of so that we can actually improve what's going on, as opposed to just being overwhelmed by something that I have no control over? This is something that happens. You and I are both really big Disney fans. We're going to get into your podcast in a minute where you talk about Disney concerns. But there are some things where it's like there's this whole culture battle that's happening right now where, like, on both sides of the aisle, people are getting really riled up about Disney. Now, I don't care what side of the aisle you fall on, doesn't matter to me, but a lot of the things that people are getting fired up about literally do not affect them personally. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a care about it. I'm not saying you shouldn't think about it. I'm not saying you shouldn't consider whether or not that's right or wrong, because obviously on this podcast, we're always talking about, like, well, what do we do? How do we navigate things? I'm not saying that. And I think that your podcast is probably really helpful with helping people come to terms with what's going on in those situations. But at some point in time, you also have to say, how do I encourage those people? How do I support those people? Or if I can't, and there's nothing I can do about it, how do I make sure that those kind of problems don't occur in my local situation that I have much more control over? Connecting with your neighbors. We don't connect with our neighbors anymore because I can talk to you in Vancouver, Dale.
Yeah.
And I love talking to you in Vancouver. Oh, I'm going to invite you on my show. But I
Yeah.
need to be able to talk to my neighbors too, right? Like, I
Yeah.
need to be able to not just engage with the people who agree with me, but also with the people who disagree with me. Now, I try and do that on this show, but it's not always that easy of a thing to do. So I like the statement, but I think that also, to your points and to some of the things that I brought up, I think that knowledge is not the goal. And if we make it the goal, we actually we short ourselves on getting to the next level, which is wisdom. And that's kind of my only
Yeah.
concern in 2022.
I hear that. Knowledge, like, it's a tool, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
and but it's a problem because you can't, like, nerds are supposed to make it so, like, we know stuff and then we then get better. And then when that comes into question, and everyone has a voice and everyone has an opinion. Again, like, these are people who we give ourselves a voice and opinion, like, and now we're criticizing for other people wanting it as well. But it's just the amount of work I actually go into. So one of the criticisms I get faced with as a person is that when I'm discussing stuff, I discuss it like it comes from a place that I'm right and you are not, and that and that I'm stubborn or whatever. But that's because those are true. But also, I no, I put a lot of work into my thoughts and opinions. So, like, I have people in my family that are Trump supporters, and I talk with them about stuff. I hear what they say. I hear why they're concerned. They come from different generations, or sometimes they're people that like we're cousins or whatever. And I listen to people. My wife used to get mad at me because she'd be like, well, "Why did you just change? Like, why did you just change your opinion? Like, why did you just change your opinion and now you're agreeing with me?" And I'm like, "Well, you presented facts, and then
your argument was superior. So what am I supposed to do?
My facts that I had, and now my opinion's changed." It's like
Right,
literally
right.
what we're supposed to do,
Right.
and that's all like scientific method is, right? And I'm like, if I was to have a belief system, science would be it, because it isn't a belief system; it's a system of questioning. It's a structure to review, criticize, and then improve, and that's all it is. It's only later on that when people get their hands on it that it becomes something different. But I really hear you. I really hear you with that, about that. It's about wisdom.
Mm.
But then people also have this kind of. Do you have kids, Jay?
No,
No.
no.
I agree with you, but having kids and being around kids shows you that they don't want your wisdom.
Sure.
And so when you offer wisdom to people, they find
Mm,
it condescending,
mm,
or you don't know me, or you couldn't
mm,
empathize with my situation,
mm,
or it's different, or I'm different, or whatever excuse we give to ourselves. And
mm.
I think that has happened too in our modern day now, where
Yes.
so the amount of people that I privately messaged to give them information and resources during the pandemic on vaccinations and
Oh, yeah.
things that they should be okay with and why or what um certain things like that. I had lots of not one of them, not one person came around to be like, oh, okay, yeah, like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, or those are really good points, or like, I really appreciate it. You must actually just kind of care about people. That thank you so much. None of them, not one,
Right.
because that's not what it was about.
Right. Right.
It wasn't. It's not what it is for them. They don't.
Right.
The cognitive dissonance. They just don't want to be told what to do, and that's it. That's the only thing that matters to them.
Totally.
And then it's filling that narrative of any piece of information that they can get that can fill that narrative of how to support their cognitive dissonance is all they do now. And then it becomes now someone has a platform, and now
Yeah.
it becomes a shared thought, and then
Right.
people, 500 people comment on it. Well, that must be a pretty valid opinion then.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and, that,
Yeah.
and that's actually a good point, is that you can actually take knowledge and do the opposite of it that you would do to find wisdom. You can take knowledge, and so you can have false knowledge, which is one thing. You can actually have knowledge that is incomplete, which is another thing. I remember so I had a pretty adverse reaction to either the vax or COVID or whatever. That's not my point in talking about that, is because I had a heart condition that I'm still trying to get over.
Yeah,
Um, my
that's
point in
rough.
that was the two things can be true. The vax can cause you to have heart complications, but COVID can be a more likely source of those same things. So as a person who had an adverse reaction, whether it was to specifically the vax or to COVID in general, I have to hold these things. And why is it difficult to hold those things in place? Because I'd rather create a villain in my mind,
Yeah.
that this is the villain or that's the villain. And
Yeah.
and the truth is I think wisdom is saying, this hurt me, but it still may have been my best choice. And that's a
Right.
difficult thing to say, because I'd rather
Very
make a villain,
difficult. It's
right?
very
Like,
difficult for people for that.
oh, yeah.
And probability is a hard thing for people to understand.
Yep.
And especially when you're dealing in billions,
Yep.
math becomes even different. And it's a whole nother thing.
Yes.
So a lot of the times my wife would be like, oh, like you said this couldn't happen. I'm like, yeah, like it essentially didn't. And she's like, but
Yeah.
there's like these 10 people that it happened to. And I'm like, yeah,
Right.
that
Right.
like probability.
Yeah. Right.
And so yeah, that's the thing. Like someone said to me, because I started following people, anyone who had like Canadian or Disney in their name, I just kind of was reaching out to them, and I blew up in my, like, right away. It was like anti-vax stuff.
Oh,
And
wow.
Alberta is kind of like Texas of North, and
Oh, nice.
they're kind of a bit of a copycat a place. So it's a
Oh,
kind of a
interesting.
strange place in Canada. And what they had said was like, well, I'll trust my immune system over a jab. And it was like, yeah, it was like you should trust your immune system. Like, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Like, the whole point is a vaccination's an email to your immune system to tell it to look out for a jerk,
Right.
and that's it. And like, that's all it is. And could people be impacted by it? Are there some negative side effects? Yeah, in the 0.01s of probability, which when you expand over billions happens. But we're talking 0.003 versus 5%,
Right.
15%.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so that's all. It's risk mitigation. And
Yes.
people also are adverse to making a decision that will cause them a problem. So someone would rather die from COVID because it happened to them than they would have died from getting a shot because they chose to take it.
Right. Exactly.
And fear's the mind killer. Yeah. And so when we're afraid, we'd be like, well, you know what? I'm just not going to do anything.
Right. Well, this is so. First of all, I wanted to talk about your podcast because I want people to. Obviously, this conversation has been a pretty deep conversation, and one of the things that I think is true that you said earlier that I want to just touch on really quickly before we talk about your podcast is that I don't think you can. This is a form of colonization, maybe not nation to nation, but idea to idea. You shouldn't colonize other people in terms of their ideas. So when we talk about wisdom, one of the reasons why I have this open conversation with you and we just talk about what the show is explaining to us, stories are, in my opinion, one of the best ways to talk about things because stories create so much space in our minds for understanding and interpretation, even more so than numbers do, which is insane that our brains are wired that way. But that's actually science, to your point. So science says your brain is wired that way. Yeah. And I think that part of wisdom is saying, that you and I can have a conversation and I'm not going to try and tell you what to think and you're not going to try and tell me what to think, but we're both going to come away from the conversation wiser. Right. And because I'm not trying to make sure that you believe what I believe and you're not trying to make sure that I believe what you believe. We're just trying to come to the table and say, what is this show telling us and how does that shape our perspective of the world? And as we talk about that thing, it unlocks things in our mind that we may otherwise not have thought about before.
Like you did it. You've done it to me like 5 times. Like I'm gonna have to sit and think about a lot of different things that you say. It happens all the time.
Yeah, same with me.
I like how you talk about religion. And I was gonna say like I'd like to hear more about it. I'd like to hear more on your thoughts and how you feel and how you navigate your world. And like you probably don't know about me. Like I did the Alpha program and stuff. Like I truly I looked for different things. I've read the Quran, go to Baha'i temples, and I've been to the Dalai Lama's compound, and that's all awesome. And that's really important for me. Like learning about religions and things. Most of us are religious. And so to be, even though I'm not religious, it's more from a place of who am I to choose, right? Like, right. Than it is from anything else. But that doesn't make doesn't make us not get along.
Not at all. No,
right?
Not at all.
Yeah. It doesn't do anything. And my uncle, I get along with him. We get along better than anybody in my whole family.
Yeah.
And and he hears what I have to he was asking me about Don't Say Gay, Bill.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
And he does not agree at all with what I have to say about it. And it was okay. And I didn't belittle him, and he heard me, and he, goes away with a bit of a and I go away with a bit of a and
perfect.
And that's it. Like that's what you want more from a conversation, right? And
that's what you want more
wisdom
of.
Piece.
That's what you want more of. Let's talk about your podcast. You have the Disney Culture Club. This has been a podcast that you've done before, and a lot of your thinking was in this regard was included in 1901, a Network 1901. So tell me about who this podcast is for, and what kind of things you're going to be talking about.
Right. Okay. So, So I stepped away from podcasting and stuff, and so Josh and I, with Andy, it was mostly Josh and I, created Network 1901. Mm-hmm. I was a co-host on another podcast at that time called the Dcast. You actually said it about with Josh. Josh and I come from that same place where we just want people to be okay, and I'm the belief if a small group of people come to you and tell you about injustice, you should just listen to them. They're probably right. I just want to be a person who cares about America, who can see stories, who has a bit of religious background, so I feel like I can at least kind of tussle with American questions, and I kind of understand where you're coming from. but coming from a place of just like, well, here's a pathway to maybe try to get better. That's kind of the podcast. And the reason why I brought it back is like a reboot quote.
Nice.
So that's obviously the best form of reboot is the one that is a sequel, but has a new cast of characters. It's called the Disney Culture Club. It's on all the pods. You can check it out there. If you want to follow me on anything like Real Dale Knows or Dale Knows on whatever social media you want to use. I hope some of you take the time to come listen to me on my other show, and we'll have Jay on there from time to time. So I'm sure you'll hear me pop up on here too.
That sounds super fun. Thank you, Dale, for joining me. Awesome insights into the show. Really appreciate that. I'm going to keep watching the show, so maybe we'll have to circle back around and have another conversation about it. But in the meantime, go check out Dale's show. Go follow Dale on the social medias. Send him some questions. And, Dale knows, so you have to listen to what he says. In the meantime, I'm going to get to the next segment of this show. Okay, so that's it for Tokyo Vice. Next up on the show, I'm going to play a little bit more from Death of a Bounty Hunter. 2 weeks ago, I talked about Death of a Bounty Hunter, and I read part of Chapter 1. Well, as you know, I've talked about this before, I'm creating a full cast audiobook, which means I've hired 11 different people to voice the 14 different roles that are in this book. Today, we're going to hear from 2 of those roles because I'm going to play an exclusive clip of the Death of a Bounty Hunter final finished audio for this book, the full cast audiobook. I'm going to play that for you. And then I'll be back more at the tail end of it to talk a little bit more about it. On Thursday, I'll be breaking down how did we get this cast? How did we go about recording it? How did I direct it? How did Nathan assist in that process? We're going to be talking about that all on Thursday's show, so don't miss that either.
Death of a Bounty Hunter, Part 1. An excerpt from the Book of the Preacher, Homily 326. And unto you I say, a man must acquit himself of the low nature which is his wont, that which striveth against its fellow man towards its own ends. For therein lies the path of the devil, and for the one of whom ruination bides. Partake not in the treacheries of the present darkness. Such works are but fleeting shadows to be scattered with the dawn, and your soul shall be likewise. Repent therefore, and do not tarry, for the hand of God smiteth the heathen, but the water shall wash him clean. Chapter 1. The Thief. Narrated by Flint.
Die, you slant-eyed rat bastard!
He spits and grunts, trying to wrap his massive steel hands around my throat. I squirm to the side as one of his heavy gear and piston-driven fingers scrapes my shoulder. Steam escapes from the fine-tuned mechanics. It's no louder than a whisper, but right next to my ear, the hiss sounds like a snake about to strike. If his fingers find my neck, I'm dead, I think. And it'll be my own damn fault because I never saw it coming. He's sitting on my chest, pinning me to the ground while trying to tear my head off, and I'm still not sure how it's even possible. How the hell's he doing this? I shove my right hand into his face and reach for his eye. He growls and tilts his head back to prevent my finger from digging into the socket. Then he brings his left hand down in a sweeping arc aimed at my head. I roll hard to the side, barely avoiding the heavy fist as it slams into the dirt. Almost lost an ear. Gotta get him off me. Desperate, I throw a left jab that catches him on the chin. When his head snaps back, I grab a handful of dust with my other hand and throw it in his face.
Shit! My eyes!
I grab his shirt as close as I can to his neck and push him back. Blinded by the dust, he throws a wild haymaker at my head. It hits nothing but air. His other hand goes for my neck again. One of his fingers thumps the side of my skull, and it feels like the head of a hammer. And then with a quick twist of his hand, he manages to slide his fingers around my neck. So this is how I die. Head ripped off in the middle of the desert. Great. His bloodshot, dirt-infused eyes go wide, and an evil grin creeps across his lips. The alloy fingers squeeze. I try to gulp down one last deep breath, but it's too late. My air's cut off. and in seconds, those inhuman hands will collapse my trachea before separating my head from my torso. I close my eye and wonder whether or not it's worth throwing up a desperate last-minute prayer. Who the hell would I pray to, I wonder? This isn't the way I intended to die. Damn you, Harold Plunkett. And damn me for letting you rip my head off. I'll see you in hell and return the favor. I resign myself to the blackness of death when I feel the alloy fingers begin to twitch. An irregular spastic jolting. With each odd convulsion of his fingers, the pressure on my neck eases. My eye jumps back open in time to see Plunkett's grin fade.
No. No. No, 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 no!
With one last convulsion, his grip fully releases. I open my mouth and try to gulp down air, but get nothing. Plunkett scrambles off my chest and dives for my satchel. He needs what's in that satchel, I think. He needs it bad. I roll over, try for air again, and get a second helping of nothing. I'd been using the satchel as a pillow before Plunkett's ambush woke me. He grabs it and tries to rip the flap open. My right hand finds the .45 caliber herb on my hip. I suck down a clean, clear breath of fresh air as I draw the pistol. The onset of oxygen feels like new life. I roll over and aim the herb .45 at him. Hey, shithead. I manage to choke out of my burning throat. He turns his hate-filled, red-rimmed eyes on me. A loud hiss comes from his steel hands. His fingers lose their grip on the satchel and it falls to the ground at his knees. He looks down at it lustfully, like a prisoner staring at a set of keys through the bars of his cell. He's so close, and yet it might as well be halfway across the desert for all the good it does him. You done? I ask. He falls back into a seated position in the dirt and glowers at his lifeless hands. The fingers are frozen as if he can no longer control them. Strands of sweat-soaked gray hair, which are usually combed over his bald scalp, stick to his forehead, and his white mutton chops are muddy with dust and sweat. He lets the iron hands fall to the desert sand.
I hope you guys enjoyed that clip of Death of a Bounty Hunter, the full cast audiobook. Stay tuned because it is coming to an audiobook distributor near you very soon, probably within the next 2 to 3 weeks. And that is it for today's show. Don't forget, new episodes of the Story Geeks Show come out every Tuesday and Thursday. On April 21st, I'll be reacting to episode 4 of Moon Knight and then going behind the scenes in our full cast audiobook of Death of a Bounty Hunter. Subscribe to the Story Geeks Show on YouTube or your preferred podcast provider so you don't miss an episode. All episodes are published to the podcast feed right after I finish recording them on YouTube. Leave me a comment and let us know what you thought about episodes 2 and 3 of Tokyo Vice, or what your reaction was to the Thor Love and Thunder trailer. Thanks for listening and or watching, and I will see you on Thursday.